Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is The Real Value of Due Diligence, how a former Merrill advisor used logic and emotion to assess his firm and business life. It's a conversation with Nate Harris, the founder of Covenant Capital. I'm Jason Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for Financial Advisors.
At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade, and each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. If you'd like to talk, please feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. Are you a financial advisor who's curious about whether you're in the best place to serve clients, or if there might be a better way to optimize your business for the future? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a new book that serves as a self-guided journey, walking you through the key steps that Diamond Consultants takes with our advisor clients, whether considering change or not. Visit diamond-consultants.com/thebook to learn more.
For many advisors, finding their North Star is a journey. Realizing what's most important to their business and their lives often serves as the foundation for a renewed commitment to their firm or as motivation for a change. Nathan Harris started his career at Merrill in 2006 and became part of a team of 8 at the firm. Nate's experience at Merrill was not unlike many other advisors we speak with. He worked with a great team, built a stellar business, and started to recognize the trend of changes at the firm. Nate dove headfirst into due diligence to explore his business life and the options available to him. He spoke to, in his words, at least 100 individuals and filled the notebook page after page with information that he and his now partner Jeff reviewed throughout the exercise. They decided that their North Star was founded on the ethos that a change had to be better not only for their clients, but their team and themselves as well. And one thing came to light early on in the process. Each actually could be better. After exploring a variety of firms and models, they made the leap to independence with Raymond James's independent broker-dealer model in 2021. In this episode, Nate offers a compelling narrative around considering change, including the trend line of evolution at Merrill and how that impacted the decision to make the leap, RIA versus independent broker-dealer and what drove the decision to choose the IBD model, breaking up a team and why some chose to stay at Merrill instead of transitioning to Raymond James, the process of due diligence and why he sees it as a valuable exercise any advisor should embark on periodically, the logic and emotion of decision-making and how to account for both. Plus, Nate offers really valuable advice on how to assess your business life and keep your North Star at the helm. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get to it. Thrilled to be joined today by Nate Harris. Nate, thanks for joining. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So to start with, can you walk us through your background and what brought you to the world of wealth management?
Great question. Thank you. My path to wealth management, probably for some, has felt like a random walk. But when you look back, you feel God's hand there. Similar to that prayer of close the doors I shouldn't walk through and open the ones I should. It was very hard for me to figure out what I wanted to do in early life. So my strategy was just do the hardest thing that kept the most doors open. And I recently gave that advice to one of my friend's sons who was applying to the Naval Academy. That strategy led me to get a BS in finance from the Wharton School. I didn't have the money to attend there directly, so I attended on a Navy ROTC scholarship. And it was a very different experience than what I had earlier on. One of the Trump children was in my corporate finance class. My sophomore roommate went on to found Indiegogo. I'd never really been around people who baseline was, if I don't make $1 million, I'm not really making it. So people in my major, they wanted to work at Goldman Sachs as an investment banker or consultants for Arthur Andersen. This was a few years before Enron, but because of the Navy scholarship, went to work on nuclear reactors aboard aircraft carrier stationed out of San Diego. And like many, I had a great inflection point through mentors. I had my first sales mentors, Nanny Martinez and Jim Frace. And it was like finding a tribe, my first professional tribe. So I had never had a mentor say, hey, if someone offers you salary and commission, ask them to remove the salary and quadruple the commission. That was very different advice than what my dad or my mom had given me to that point. And also my uncle Tom, who is probably the greatest entrepreneur I know personally, who went on to be a venture capitalist. So ultimately, that mentorship had me take a job in the financial industry in 2006. I like to think just in time for the 2008 crisis. But in the end of the day, being a financial steward was where I was supposed to end up. It's complex. It's full of humanity. It's very difficult and it's very rewarding. So I think it was the right place for me all along.
I love that. And I think you might be the first with the nuclear reactor and aircraft carrier experience that we've had on the show. So that's certainly a compelling background. I want to talk a little bit now about your current chapter, which is Covenant Capital. Can you tell us a little bit about your firm, the name, types of services you provide, just some background on the firm?
Of course. So Covenant Capital is a wealth management firm that empowers entrepreneurs and business owners, primarily in the United States, but also internationally, to translate their money into meaning. The name is a result of our due diligence process. So we, my business partner, Jeff, and I don't know how many, but it was at least 100 individuals we spoke to during our due diligence. And we just had a OneNote notebook filled with so much data that as soon as we got to page 20, we couldn't remember what was on page 1. So we started to think about why were we leaving? Why did we not like one thing or like another? And we just tried to find commonalities in those whys. And we came up with a fairly simple way to parse through it. It needed to be better, at least neutral for Jeff and I and our families. It needed to be better neutral for our teammates. And obviously, most importantly, it needed to be better for our client families. So if it was better in all those dimensions and we didn't want to do it, then we really had to challenge ourselves. Were we in the right industry? And one of the earliest things we realized in the due diligence process is it could be better. But then it's the story of the last mile is most of the journey. Well, okay, we know it can be better, but there's all these different places where it is better. What one's optimal? We just needed to make sure we took action that was aligned with those three stakeholder groups. So Covenant Capital is a reference to that commitment. God to Abraham, Jeff and I made a covenant to our stakeholders, and it's also visually incorporated into our logo. So the name is a commitment to the North Star.
Oh, I love that. It's a great story. And I would actually add, so you used the term, you needed to make sure it was better or at least neutral for your three stakeholders. And I think the three buckets you laid out are the exact right buckets through which to view this, right? It has to be not only better for your clients, but your team and yourselves as well. I would actually say better enough. That's the term we typically use because I think a lot of people probably feel like you felt back to your Merrill days. It's not that hard to squint to see a world or a firm or a model that's better on the margins than your current setup, right? I think most advisors, regardless of where they are, have frustrations and pain points that could be solved elsewhere. But a transition is a challenge. It's a lot of work and it's a lot to put your clients through. And so we often talk about it through the lens of better enough. And then it sounds like from there, your decision was, okay, if we agree there is something out there that's better enough, now it's about finding what the right kind of version or what the right next chapter is in our journey. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it is a fair statement. At the same time, where you are, they're going to invest hopefully in what's not working and get better. So I think you got to also evaluate it over a trend line. I don't think you should leave when you don't get your way right away. But if it's trending in the wrong line and you're constantly asking yourself, is this the best it could be? Could we deliver more? Then I think you owe it to yourself to investigate that.
Yep, I think that's right. And I mean, the term we would use is pushes and pulls. And honestly, when we see the biggest teams in the industry move these days, it's less about the pushes. It's less about here's what's frustrating me or limiting me, or I had a bad day, or I didn't get my way with XYZ. And it's much more about the pulls, the draw of something greater. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily mean independence like it did for you. That very well might mean another wirehouse or a regional firm. I want to talk a little bit now. One of the interesting things about your move was you were a large Merrill team. I think it was 8 people on your team at Merrill. 4 decided to make the leap and 4 stayed. Can you talk about that? Why? And what was that experience like with not moving or lifting out with the entirety of the team?
Yeah. So just before we move there, I would agree. You definitely want to run towards something versus run away from something. And in terms of the team, yeah, it was definitely a hard thing emotionally. I think when teams fracture, those tend to be the most volatile and tough transitions. And when you're doing the due diligence, it also, at least for us, didn't feel comfortable because our standard is generally be very open and transparent. That said, if you have the privilege to lead, I think it's your responsibility to make the best move on the board for those that are looking to you to lead them and not complain that the move might be emotionally hard to navigate. So there was a couple bullets, both pushes and pulls, that led us to investigate. So one of those bullets is my team originally was 3 advisors, and our advisor, Mike, who my former partner and I bought out through Merrill CTP program, when we were buying him out, we didn't really consider how Mike was really the emotional glue, not just between the advisors, but the whole team. And so losing him caused, it was still a great team, but it was different than the team that we were all used to.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a trend line. So when I started at Merrill, I felt like all I had to do was ask, and Merrill would bring awesome power to bear. My second cold call was by far the greatest cold call I ever had. I called someone who's still a client today, and he said, "Sure, I'll talk to you." I said, "Well, what's your goals? What do you need to talk?" "Well, I need to refinance my planes. I need to sell my business." And I'm thinking, the trainee pitch book's not going to cut it. By the end of the day, Merrill had hooked me up with Hulan Loki. I just felt fully able to bring a great power to bear. And then when I left at the end, it was a much more process driven. You would send a referral into the system. Next week, someone would be assigned to give you a call. We would decide where to go from there. And that's probably a better risk management process, but it wasn't the place I joined. So we were concerned that Merrill might be moving from a 95.5 place, 5% they're working on 95 grade, to a 94.6 or 93.7. So we had concerns about the trend line. And then just looking at the industry, we'd go to these top advisor conferences and somebody would be held up as the advisor they emulate. And then we'd read in an industry magazine within a year of that they were somewhere else. So firms were exiting the protocol. Merrill wasn't just using sticks or just carrots. They were also using sticks. We were concerned number of households versus just AUM in production. And based on my partner's age, I thought that if I take over from him, I'll have a fixed path. I'll make a great deal of money, but I'll be locked into this path that might not be trending in the direction I'm comfortable with. So to me, if others are feeling this way, certainly for us, it had added up to a great time to do a due diligence. My former partner went on 1 or 2 of them. I could sense his heart wasn't in it. I think there was logic there, but it's hard to convince people with logic. You got to get them with both logic and emotion. And I just felt that even though it was a great path laid out before me, if I stayed there, by the time I was his age, I might end up feeling the same way. And we were open to staying, but we weren't open to staying without doing the due diligence. We thought we owed it to the stakeholders. So at the end of the day, it was very hard because we are loyal people and it's difficult for us not to operate in full light. But even realizing that convinced us to leave because we didn't want to be part of a system where you can't do what you believe to be right out in the open. And while I was thinking about the questions and what you might ask, I say in the Shawshank Redemption, where he crawls through that uncomfortable space to get freedom at the end, you guys had introduced me to Ben Bynes over at Dynasty, and he said, "Look, it's going to be emotionally hard. So are you going to do the hard thing or not?" Which is what we needed to hear.
Yeah, I love so much of what you said, and it really resonates because we hear this a lot, not just from Merrill advisors, probably primarily from wirehouse advisors, that the firms have changed over time. And I actually like that you acknowledge part of that is just because risk culture has changed, FINRA regulations have changed, right? That's not necessarily a reflection of, oh, Merrill is trying to do wrong by their advisors. I think that's unfair to Merrill. It's just a
Absolutely
reflection
agree.
of, yeah, exactly. I mean, the industry has changed a lot. Your business, I presume, changed. And that doesn't mean that Merrill was a bad place or that you weren't grateful for the firm, but it does mean, and that's exactly the way we would articulate it to our advisor clients, is you almost need to diligence not just other firms, but your own firm periodically, right? You need to be doing that exercise, even if you're viewing it as, it sounds like how you originally viewed it, it's maybe a plan B. Like we're fine with the possibility or even the likelihood of staying put. but we owe it to those stakeholders you laid out, our clients, our teams, and ourselves, to at least understand what else is out there. Is there something that's better enough? And there's power in that exercise where even if you look around, and this is not a sales pitch for movement, but even if you look around and see, you know what, there's nothing else out there that is really captivating and compelling, I think that allows you to recommit to Merrill or your whatever your current firm is. In your case, it was Merrill, with kind of a renewed passion and a renewed energy.
Absolutely. I mean, just think if you have the exact same portfolio you're giving your clients 10 years later, that might be okay, but it's probably not okay if you haven't done a due diligence on it in 10 years.
Such a good analogy. I'm going to steal that one from you. I hope you don't mind.
Of course. Of course.
So let's talk now about the process, the due diligence process. You ultimately landed in the independent space on the Raymond James platform. Did you look at both captive and independent options, or were you pretty certain that if you left, you were not going to go another W-2 route?
Well, we were pretty certain we weren't going to go a W-2 path, but we considered, I feel bad for my partner, Jeff. I have a hard time, maybe this is the nuclear reactor engineer in me, but I have a hard time cutting the due diligence short. So our process started like this. We called all the teams we had seen leave from Merrill, some that we had just read about and some that we knew personally. One of my neighbors is the founder of the largest Finet team, so we called them. We saw a great $1 billion team that we have tremendous admiration for leave our local office to go to Kestra. So we reached out to Mark there. We had a good professional friend that was revamping Stifel's 1099 channel. So we talked to him. Jeff was formerly at LPL. So we reached out to LPL and some of the super OSJs there. And then everyone we talked to, especially if it was an advisor, we said, was there a second or third choice that was pretty close? And if there was, then we added them to the consideration. And we just kept chaining the conversations as far as we could go, which is how we ended up speaking to RJ. And I think I remember this one conversation where Jeff was asking, I believe it was Goldman we were on the phone with, has anyone ever asked more questions than Nate? And the guy with a very tired expression said, there's not even a close second. We did that. We called Diamond, which I know you guys might suggest we start there, but we had called Diamond. And the reason we reached out to them is I had been impressed that Diamond knew about Merrill CTP. You guys struck me as something as a consultant, not just a recruiter. And so we reached out to Diamond. We ended up getting on the phone with Mendy, who connected us with Barbara. And that led us also talking to Sanctuary, Commonwealth, and Dynasty. So we talked to a lot of people out there. We knew we didn't want to be W-2. We wanted to say yes to W-2 because we had a $3 million offer. As a $2 million producer, I wanted to say yes to $6 million. But that place that offered it, they didn't have DocuSign, just as an example. And I started getting a migraine thinking about how that would be for our client families or for our team. And again, it needs to be, you need that guiding light where it's better for all of those. So at the end, we ended up at RJ. There's a lot of reasons we ended up there. They have a W-2 channel. They have a 1099 channel. They have an RIA channel. So we thought as we grow and as the industry evolves, there'll be room to move within here. And they're also the only W-2 channel we knew of where the advisors could leave in the open with their book. And to me, when you think about what kind of culture that creates and how that incentivizes management versus the advisors, even though we didn't want to go to that W-2, we probably would have stayed at Merrill as long as we knew the door wasn't going to close on us, right? Because we were willing to try to push it a little more, but we just didn't want to go. So because of that, we just felt RJ had consistently high ratings on everything. Wasn't really a lot. They had a lot of freedom. They had a lot of independence with many of the same supportive W-2 channels, ability to move to the RIA. I know branding can be important. They had ability to recruit other advisors to the brand. You could brand alongside them. You could brand without them. You could brand as them. And so even though that's a small thing, I think it's indicative of a bigger thing that points to the culture of RJ. And ultimately, there was a close second and third, but RJ ended up winning out and was the best fit for us and our client families.
I want to ask you, with some benefit of hindsight, how you feel about that decision and how RJ has helped you to grow. But before I do, first of all, I appreciate your kind words about our firm. I promise to our audience I did not pay Nate to say those.
Did not suggest I say any of those things.
I will say, so that's a cumbersome due diligence process. I think one of the interesting things about advisor due diligence is there is no way, one way to skin the cat. Some advisors would absolutely throw up in their mouths, excuse the expression, at the thought of conducting a process like you did. I mean, that is daunting, time consuming, and overwhelming. Other advisors are much more akin to that approach of let's look at as many things as possible. I don't think there's a right answer. I think it's just a matter of what feels more soulful to you. What do you think is the right way for you and your team to consume information? I am of the opinion, though, that people who look at only one firm are doing themselves a disservice. I think there's import in having a comp or having multiple comps, just because there are so many new models and so many various, I'll call it different nuances to each of the different channels and models. So I want to talk now about your experience with Raymond James. And for those who aren't familiar, Nate alluded to this, but Raymond James is the only firm on the street on the W-2 side that writes into their contracts that advisors own their book. You ultimately opted for the independent side of Raymond James. And I like how you position that look, is there a scenario where taking a 300% or a 350% deal would have been great for Nate and his partners? Sure. But as you thought through from the client's perspective, it feels like you felt like there was more benefit to the independent space. Has that thesis proved to be true? Like, do you feel, maybe I'd say it more succinctly, do you regret the decision to go independent, or do you feel like you made the right choice?
I mean, even when it was tough, we always felt we made the right choice. It was weird resigning at my former firm and then coming over here to the building we had bought. And we weren't, because we had been W-2, we weren't really able to do anything until we had resigned. So we ended up, we're calling people on folding chairs because we didn't want to do any remodeling. We bought it on the day that we left. So there was just so much that happened all at once. It did feel like I was in a little boat out in the middle of the ocean on that drive over here. But then you started making calls, and just like anything else, sure, it was hard, but we don't regret it at all. And in fact, I think if you are, I don't know if the right word is called to be a business owner, but if for those in that tribe, once you get there, you realize that's where you're supposed to be, right? And so if you think it might be a place to be, you should investigate it, because I don't know, I'm still looking for the words to put it together. But when you converse with other business owners, both your clients, other advisors, I just think you walk through the world in a different way. And for me, that's the way I want to walk.
And what about specific to Raymond James? How do you feel about that decision? Has the platform lived up to what you hoped it would? And I guess why I'm asking is because there's no question that you described all the benefits of the independent channel of Raymond James. More scaffolding and support, the ability to co-brand, a really great platform. But the other way to spin that point of view is that it's a fairly limited or overly supported version of independence, certainly compared to like the RIA space. You mentioned firms like Dynasty and Sanctuary. Have you felt that to be the case? Like, what's been the experience with Ray J?
Yeah, I think like RIAs, like Sanctuary, yeah, especially like Dynasty might be different, but like joining an RIA and a W-2 channel, or even as a partner, sometimes those are becoming restrictive as well, because then their own compliance as they grow becomes different. So I think at RJ and the 1099 channel, they don't have anything. You can find the things they have piecemeal elsewhere. It's just like bread, right? You have yeast, water, flour, but you end up with big different results in how it's mixed together. The prep, the proofing, the application is where it becomes differentiated. So when I think of Dan Cole, who's been our assistant dividend director, he's connected us tons of resources to the firm, or Megan, who's the RJ recruiter in our area, who's helped us navigate our first negotiations with new FA recruits, or John Hanlon, who is our 25 million private wealth consultant, who's been on the game whenever we have a new 25 million net worth prospect just delivered. You can do home office visits at 2.5 million. But unlike a lot of other 1099 channels that somewhat lean, sometimes W-2 in their compliance or oversight, what we found is there's still a lot of freedom. RJ uses Money Guide Pro, but they let you invest in e-money, which we have done, or Right Capital. You can buy a building, you can build out models, you can charge what you want. If you make a mistake, you can own it, you can refund it, you can do it quickly. It's just standard. Ultimately, when you own a business, and I can differentiate the RIA channel too, but when you own the business, you own the outcomes, you're at the wheel. So when we'd go to RJ conferences, or when we did talk to people in the RJ RIA as well, you'll just find everyone was happy. It just, for anyone that's going to conferences, if you're at a place where everyone's happy, that's a good sign. But if everyone's talking about who left, it might be a sign to do a due diligence. So I think you can find versions of all of that. You're looking for the right mix that fits you, your team, and your clients. And then when we're looking at an RIA space, and we think about the RIA space. So if you were to ask, hey, will you always be an independent broker dealer at the 1099 channel? Then we would say, we'll evaluate it, right? And just like I said, I think you need to do a diligence at least once every 5 years. So for us, if we'll be here or be in a place that has more freedom will depend on the freedom they incorporate into this channel. One thing that we have our eye on is the adoption of AI. And even if they don't adopt it into their baseline model, if they give the freedom to adopt it on our own, that might be enough. I mean, every time I take Zoom meeting notes, I'm thinking, this is not optimal. This has been solved, yet I'm doing it. So if that is not solved next year, it will weigh on me more. As we were talking about before, you have to look at that trend line. So we'd like to see them continuing to build up more resources around video and social media. We want to continue build up around resources for ultra high net worth clients for us. We'd love to see a willingness to see the client holistically, which might mean taking a loss in one department because it's a win overall. This has been out there, but it's not always widely adopted. We'd certainly like access to a TAMP or algorithmic trading, tax loss harvesting. We'd like to see those things. So if we were to look at RIA space or stay here, those are some of the areas of freedom that we think will continue to develop that we're paying attention to. And we want to be at the forefront of those types of adoption. So for us, going to the RIA or staying an independent broker dealer will depend on the value of the support that we're getting from that independent broker dealer platform and or the freedom that we have or don't have between one or the other. So we don't really look at it as the RIA versus independent broker dealer. We look at it more going back to that guiding light. And if we use your words, is it enough better along these three stakeholders? And if it is, then we will go.
That's such a refreshing answer to me, because I asked that question of most of our breakaway guests. And honestly, usually the answer is some version of like the new firm is perfect and we love everything about it and we wish we did it sooner. And there's no question. It sounds like your experience has been overwhelmingly positive. But I love that you view this as an ongoing kind of journey. Like, just like you said, I'm going to evaluate Merrill every so often. That doesn't mean that has all of a sudden stopped. And it sounds like you're an analytical person and the type of person who enjoys that type of diligence work. But I think that's important, that things change. And I love your portfolio analogy. You wouldn't make changes to a portfolio and then decide, okay, we're good for the next 10 years. It's something you're constantly evaluating and it needs to be a kind of living, breathing thing. So
yeah,
thank you.
I wouldn't say I love it, but I feel a responsibility to do it.
Which is honestly,
I would agree that due diligence I described was exhausting and we did not see many other advisors take it. But I mean, if you feel that's what you need to do to be authentic, I think it's hard to shortchange that and still ask people to sign on the dotted line.
And I think, honestly, that's probably a more refreshing point of view for you're the leader of this business and you're a steward and you have a responsibility to your clients that, yeah, was it the most fun process? Of course it wasn't, but you felt like it was a necessary evil to land on your version of optimal or your version of perfect.
I think that's right.
I want to turn this on its head a little bit. You've spoke now about the Ray J experience. Anything that you miss about Merrill or even just the W-2 space in general that you wish you had or that you look back on fondly?
Yeah. But just before you go, I do want Ray J to adopt those things and we will look at it. But I would agree, like other advisors, we wish we had done it earlier. And the experience has been great. In terms of how we view Merrill, and this is just me, I view Merrill as almost like it before and after the acquisition, not really even then, but before and after the merging of the culture. So when Merrill was acquired by B of A, I was thinking if B of A becomes like Merrill, this is going to be unstoppable. And if it becomes like B of A, it might still be great, but it probably won't be the place for me. Like I mentioned before, when I needed something, Merrill, I always felt was a FA driven culture, not a top down bank process type culture. And an example of that might be when this is probably the Monday, I feel like we were required over the weekend, maybe it's Monday or Tuesday. The day after the acquisition news came out, I went to the local Bank of America businesses at retail centers. And I said, hey, I'm Nate Harris. I'm with one of the Merrill Lynch centers here. Let's try to figure out how we can make this work. And they said back, well, we're waiting for instructions. And I said, well, why don't we just do it and we'll recommend up what's working. And I felt like I was just speaking Greek or another language. And again, like you said before, it doesn't mean that big bank process culture is bad or even a hit, but it was a big culture shock for me. So that said, in my mind, Merrill still has a great name. And it had in my mind, it had a greater name from maybe an earlier era of swagger. In 2008, I would show people the Morningstar report on Merrill's site, and it said, look, a lot's going wrong there with the subprime, but wealth management unit is still the crown jewel of Wall Street. So I felt like I was there at the tail end of the thundering herd. Yes, I am definitely proud, and I think well of them. I'd love to see them spun out of the bank, although I doubt that will ever happen. But at the end of the day, different strokes for different folks. I'm sure Merrill is the right place for some. But as we've brought up a few times, once you have your business established, you owe it to yourself to evaluate what's out there. You owe it to your clients. I don't think you should do a due diligence call every day. I don't think you should take every recruiting call. But again, if you haven't done one in the last 5 or 10 years, how authentic are you in recommending your clients work with you? If you just are, maybe this is too harsh, but if you're just drinking the Kool-Aid wherever you find yourself, I don't think that's the type of work the people that are looking for from us. I think they're looking for us to make sure that we're at the best place to service them. And I think just like making sure the portfolio is right or the insurance right or the financial plan's right, not every little bump you need to think about leaving, but if it's trending off or if you're finding other options out there to have greater capacity to serve those you hold out to care for and steward, then I think, again, you owe it to yourself to investigate that.
Yeah, it seems like pretty common feedback across the board from people who either grew up at Merrill or who lived through the two very different flavors of Merrill. And I agree with your assessment that while there's no question the Bank of America acquisition is what prompted a lot of the changes you're describing, there was clearly a honeymoon period even after the acquisition. Like, I don't ascribe all of these changes to 2008 or even 2009. I think there was a honeymoon period where the firm continued to operate, Merrill that is, as a standalone entity. There is no question, though, today that it is Bank of America Merrill. I mean, we hear that from just about everybody, even advisors who still are there and who still like the firm and like the brand. They will still acknowledge that it is the bank's culture and the bank's leadership first and foremost.
Yeah, I would agree. It wasn't like a binary the day after it was different, right? I think we did operate for a while, which is one reason we stayed there for a while, right? But then when we saw, going back to that first thing, as the bank had become more like Merrill and Merrill become more like the bank, I think you would agree Merrill has become more like the bank versus the bank becoming more
no
like
question.
Merrill.
No, I don't think even the staunchest Merrill defender would deny that, to be honest with you. I think it's just a fact. So let's talk now. I think people talk about the independent space in abstract terms. Sometimes I get more freedom or I'll get a better payout or my life will be better. I want to ask you, though, in more concrete terms, can you give some specific examples of things the independent space has enabled you to do that you couldn't have dreamed of doing in a captive environment like Merrill?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's things that we miss about W-2 and there's things that we couldn't dream about doing, right? So sometimes it's the contrast that highlights it. So whenever I'm dealing with the books or dealing with a lawyer, it feels like I'm not doing work, even though, of course, it is work. It's the work of a business owner. But because it's not directly with the client, and that's what we did for almost 2 decades, it feels different. We think of it as, when we're talking to recruits, sometimes you get to be a W-2 princess. You don't figure out who cleans the office or who shreds the paper. But then you also don't always have the latest fintech or guided by what's right for the client. Sometimes it's policy. So that's part of our value proposition to those that are maybe looking and want to come to Covenant Capital. that we built on top of the Raymond James chassis. We figured out some of those things for you. Back to your original question, is there stuff we couldn't dream? Sure, you don't own your practice in the wirehouse. They say you do, but you don't. And so one of the greatest things for us, and when we recruit to Covenant, we start with that. Even at Covenant, you will own your practice. It's our job to keep you happy here. And if you're unhappy, tell us why. Maybe we can improve. Maybe we can invest in your practice, help you get launched elsewhere. That's a better fit. Let's make the pie bigger instead of worrying who's getting the last piece. When you own your business, there's a lot of implications, right? You're able to do a lot of special stuff for your clients. Yeah, it's not concrete, but we've bought, one of our 8-figure clients had never bought a new car. We bought the car for him, delivered his house, drove his other away. One of our clients that had an exit last year, we invited his family to one of the business clubs that we belong to, and we walked through the trust he had set up. Yeah, and not just the legalities of those things, but his hopes and dreams for what it would mean for his legacy, for his kids, and his fears about how substantial wealth can sometimes hurt your children. That's super smooth in the independent space. Even this interview, I can't imagine trying to get Merrill to approve this interview or a wirehouse, where when I asked Ray J about it, they said, we'll give you some advice, but do the interview. And so being able to be on CNBC or brand on YouTube, we bought the building we're in. You can't buy the building. We rent one of the floors to a different, not to a financial advisor practice, but to a different entity, making the space as you believe it should be. So I always thought the office should look a certain way. One of my hobbies is technology. So you walk into my office, you say good morning, the blinds adjust, the lights adjust, it gives a market update. Again, that's small, but it all adds up to that brand. Hiring and firing who you want to be on the bus for you is not a huge process. You hire and fire who you want to be on the bus with you. You're recruiting other advisors, navigating bespoke deals that fit their practice and yours in a specific way versus taking boilerplate agreements that cannot be modified, or it's like reaching heaven and earth to modify them. And being a tech guy, access to a much more robust and diverse tech stack, and all that implications has for how you service your team and your clients. So for us, some of those are maybe softer, not what you're looking for, and some of those are specific. But to me, you're either truly at the helm or you're just being told you are. And for us, coming from that trend line, we would tell clients, when you cross the Atlantic, if you're 1 degree off, you're going to end up in a different country. We need to be at the helm to deliver what we're telling you we want to deliver for you. I think if you want to be at the helm and deliver as you say versus policy guide you or other things, then that's an indication that it might be time to do due diligence if that's not where you find yourself.
Is that all you're able to? No, I'm just kidding. That's an incredibly extensive list, and it sounds like it's been a real breath of fresh air. My other takeaway from this is that I want you to come and design my office, because that's very cool. When I say good morning, nothing happens.
You should definitely come check out the office. It is a cool office.
Will do. Absolutely will do. So you've alluded now to these conversations around how you've brought this up to your clients, and I'm curious what their reception was, because I think one of the things that keeps particularly wirehouse advisors inert or stuck in their seats, even when they know it's suboptimal, is they fear the client transition piece. So even if they know in their hearts that it will be better for all those stakeholders you mentioned, it doesn't matter if you worry that your clients are not going to follow you or they're not going to react well to the move. So what I'm wondering about is, how did you tell the story to clients, and what was their reaction to moving from arguably one of the top 3 brands in finance in Merrill or Bank of America to a relatively unknown? And I know you can co-brand with Ray J to a varying degree, but still a relatively unknown in terms of the independent space.
Yeah, I mean, no one knows who Covenant Capital was till we started, right? I mean, that's absolutely going to happen. And most of the time when you're small, until you get bigger, your brand is still going to be Nate Harris or Jeff, the advisor, and the relationship you built there. So I think that's a natural worry. And it will probably depend, right? Did you just inherit your book, or, was your book referred by the bank, or have you built meaningful relationships over time? We had that fear as well. because we focus on business owners, and I had just applied to top in-state Forbes. And so we had just looked, well, how many of our clients are business owners or linked to business owners? About 70% of our book is linked in that way. So the most common thing we heard was, I remember when I did the same thing, right? So a lot of our families had a commonality. And in fact, it was something that brought us even closer to them because they were thinking when they left AT&T or the telecom business or wherever they were to do something new where they thought it could be better, where they wanted to be at the helm and have that trend line. Probably the next most common thing we heard was, what do we need to do to stay with you? Because we had bought out Mike's practice, those relationships weren't fully solidified. So in that case, more of those people would say, well, I want to meet with both teams. And the people that you had built the relationship might say something like, yeah, I like them, but you know me. A few people left both practices, just said, hey, I've moved to Tampa or I've moved here and my golf buddy, I'm going to go work with them. But for us, at least of the people that we had sourced as clients, almost everyone came along. There was a few surprises. One person I thought for sure wasn't coming, didn't. And then on the other hand, we had somebody that was 10% on our pipeline. And he said, we know where the talent is. Just tell us what we need to do. And he was the owner of a CPA shop. So that was a great boost. I think if your whole team's going, your book's going to follow. And if you do a harder transition like us, if you're splitting from the team or if the team is splitting, it is a different calculus because when two white lab coat people disagree, that creates inertia in the system and people might be more likely to stay or be shocked and not be able to make a decision. That said, Barbara, our diamond consultant, said, Nate, the relationships would follow, and you're right. And she was right. So I would say that the people worried, they want to work with you. They don't want to work with Merrill. Ask yourself, where does the relationship lie? If it lies with Merrill, they're probably going to stay at Merrill. If it lies with you, they're probably going to stay with you, or just transpose Merrill to wherever you are. But none of that really matters, right? If you believe it's better on the other side and you're a good advisor, you got to have the courage to do what's right, even if it's hard or if it means losing money in the short run. Yeah, I think about my children and the time and resources they take. And what does that matter next to what they mean to us? Most of the worthwhile things in the world have an element of difficulty. So you'll be happier, your team will be happier. And even if it doesn't go as well as you want, if you're willing to outgrind and outwork, just like you were before, you have to ask yourself, how can you not do this? One of the most rewarding comments I got was, so our team is Nate and Jeff, the two advisors. And then we have Anne-Marie and Jessica, who are our care coordinators. And then we have Allison, who's our processor, and we have Kate, who's our manager. And then we have a bunch of external and internal partners like our insurance referral partner, Jim, and some of the people I mentioned earlier. And Anne-Marie, who is somebody that really wants to know the process, do it right. Her brother is her kind of business confidant. And she said, Nate, I was talking to my brother, and he said to me, this is the first time he's seen me excited about work in over a decade. So that is going to bring a lot of energy to your team if you do the right process. And that's going to be conveyed to your clients. Don't you want to be at the helm of something like that? It's special. It's meaningful. Starting this business is one of the most meaningful professional things that any of us has ever done. And it's a special fraternal and organization, even just within Covenant Capital. Sure, it's not the brand name of Merrill or Raymond James on its own, but our brand we are Merrill trained advisors. We are, and we are Raymond James trained advisors. And then we built Covenant Capital on top of those two great brands. So we think that you're getting all the lessons we've learned from those brands, and then a bespoke delivery that is more catered to the clients we specifically serve.
Yeah. So 3 things I wanted to just dive in or double click on. First and foremost, no question about it. Pretty much every advisor we've worked with will tell us there are surprises both ways, which you said as well. Clients you thought would come with you that didn't, and clients you thought no way in hell that ultimately did follow you. That's the first.
Mm-hmm.
The second is particularly business owner clients or clients who are entrepreneurial in their own right. They really get it. And a lot of times, honestly, clients care less than advisors might think.
Totally agree with that. That's totally true.
Yeah, because to your point, the relationship is with you. They trust you, the advisor, not necessarily the firm. And then just the last thing I wanted to say was you talk also about, I love how you said it. It almost doesn't matter. Like, of course it matters because you need to make a living and you need to service clients. But if in your heart that this is the right thing to do, you need to be willing to take that risk and to do something that's uncomfortable. And your Shawshank analogy of somebody climbing through the gutters or the sewers, I believe it was in Shawshank.
I just said a difficult path.
Yeah, I think it was sewers in the movie, but I think
Was a sewer. Yes, it
that's the
was.
right kind of analogy. I hope it's not as crummy of a process
Yeah, not as bad as that.
as
But even if it
Shawshank.
is, and that's what's right, don't you need to do it? I mean,
Exactly.
still don't you need to do it, right?
Yep. No, I love that answer, and I appreciate you sharing it so
Yeah,
honestly.
and you got to remember, all brands start out unknown, right? All brands start out unknown. So does that mean you don't want to brand? I mean, it doesn't mean, every great brand, the most valuable companies, and some of them started in a garage. Oh, who the hell is Apple, right? I mean, so what? If you can do it better and you can do it right, like go ahead and do it. That was the feeling we had, and that was our guiding light. Now, granted, we did it from a position of strength and established. We didn't start out of a garage. We had a substantial practice with clients that loved us. And so for the advisors that are listening that have substantial practice and advisors that love them, show stewardship to that love. And if you're at the right place, put your head down and do more for them. And if you aren't, get through it so that you can get to the place where you can.
I think your comment or the quote you made, the story you shared around one of your team members, this is the most excited you've been coming to work in years. Advisors, I think, often feel like, well, the firm is a pain or there's pain points at Merrill or my wirehouse, but I'm insulating my clients from it. And that might be true, but clients kind of sense that and it's exhausting and it shows up in the way you show up. So even if you're ultimately insulating your clients from all of the bureaucracy and the red tape of the firm, in this case, Bank of America Merrill, there's still an element of like, they can sense that your heart isn't 100% in it. And by the way, all of that time you're spending on the non-additive or non-business additive activities, like the mandatory compliance trainings and trying to get a quick email approved, that's time away from working with your clients and from building the book. I think you would agree.
I would totally agree with that. And look, I also think you should shield your clients from the bureaucracy. We try to deliver signature ready solutions as much as possible. Even if there's 10,000 value meals, we try to narrow it down to the one or two that will fit. But you do have to ask yourself, not only if being that kind of crap umbrella is taking away from your clients, but is it also taking away from the energy when you go home and purport? If you said, well, my primary intention is my family, when you go home and you're totally beat down or you're mentally exhausted, are you giving them the most? Are you giving yourself the most? What about your teammates? You need to manage that for all those stakeholders. And so I don't think it's bad to do that for some time. I think it is part of your responsibility to shield them from bureaucracy and just get them to solutions. But at the same time, if that is an unnecessary, or if you can cut out of that, then you're right. Like when we talked about running from something or towards something, if you didn't do that, what delight could you deliver? How much closer could you get people to their goals? Could you have some time to talk to their children, which maybe you haven't done? You're saying, oh, I care for you and your most important thing. We've taken a number of clients by just say, does your advisor say they're doing it for you? Does he even know your children's name? No? Maybe you should meet with us, right? So to us, maybe you will have the time to do that if you can remove some of that unnecessary bureaucracy shielding or whatever else is taking your time that's not part of the core delivery.
All right, we got time for two more quick questions here. First, tell me what the next chapter looks like. I'll let you choose the time frame, but tell me in 1, 3, or 5 or 10 years, what does Covenant Capital look like?
Absolutely. So Covenant Capital will continue the focus on bringing advisors to our platform. We aspire to be a leader in incorporating AI and technology. We will continue to go deeper into helping families transfer substantial wealth in ways that enhance and empower versus hurt the ones they love the most. We will continue to be humble, and we will try to meet with every top advisor from every top advisor list that will meet with us. And we will incorporate their ideas that fit our team and our clients into our practice. brain trust have been excellent. We have a variety of brain trusts, some which we've joined, some which we're self-developed, both with other advisors and mentors. And for those listening, I'd highly recommend Brain Trust. Happy to talk to anyone that wants to talk about it. We'll continue to be a student of our industry. One of my goals is to learn something new on the day I die. And I hope I learn something new on the day, you get emotional to think about it, the day we turn Covenant Capital over to new ownership. So I think most importantly, we will try to navigate from a place of abundance and guard against a mindset of scarcity. So we're not exactly sure. I think the world's changing under us, but I think if we can hold to those North Stars, we can lean into that, into those things we can see and give ourselves capacity to navigate the surprises that are inevitable. I'm not exactly sure what form of success Covenant Capital will take, but I think it will be a success that, maybe it's a weird way to say it, but it will continue to focus on our client success versus our own. And then we end up being successful alongside them. I know I'm not the first to say that, but if we just keep doing those types of things, it has worked out for us. And I imagine it will continue to do so. Now, whether that be 1, 5, 10, or 20 years from now.
All right, last question. Any parting words of wisdom or advice? And I'll give this through the lens of maybe somebody who is either considering a transition or for somebody who thinks maybe the opposite, like I'm pretty well served or I'm scared of a transition. What advice do you have for your fellow advisors who have not yet walked this path?
There's a few tactical things and a few mental things. I would tell you, less driven people than you have achieved it. So you can achieve it if that's the right thing for you. The money will be there. Don't leave for the money. And in fact, I would encourage people to look at the money as a source of investment in the new business. It's going to be hard, and most worthwhile things are. I would recommend hiring a great lawyer. We had Sharon Ash from the hamburger firm. She was totally no nonsense. Totally amazing, kept us out of trouble on the straight and narrow. I'm sure we would have made mistakes with that without her guidance. For those that want to do a deep diligence, but think, oh my gosh, I don't want to go through that, which we talked about before. Facilitators like Diamond can be so critical and helpful. Reach out to them. And then I would set expectations with your family and your team that it's going to be tough. Bonus your staff when they come. And think about that new flexibility. We have a self-scheduler. They may have added that now at my prior firm, but that alone probably frees up a month worth of work. And then what can you do with that new month worth of work in terms of delighting and servicing your clients? So if you put all that down to maybe 2 things, right? I would say read your comp plan. If it's 50 pages, if it's full of sticks and carrots, if you hear about a new policy, just ask yourself, are they making the zoo nicer or are they building the walls higher? And act accordingly, right? Act accordingly. And look, if anything I have said resonates with anyone listening to this, Jeff and I would love to pay it forward. We'll help you think through it. We had so many, everyone we called helped us. Every advisor we called that was formerly at Merrill, at Kestra, at Dynasty, at Sanctuary, gave us time, made time for us, and helped us. And I think we would love to pay that back. And we would love people to find out they're at the right place or they're not. So I would say, give us a call. We owe it to pay it forward.
That's incredibly kind and gracious of you. Nate, thank you so much. This has been an absolute blast. I loved hearing your story, and I'm looking forward to checking back in a couple of months and years to see how far you've taken this thing. So thanks again for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, too. It has been a blast.
As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibility seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions, and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.